Welcome back. Some folks remain skeptical about climate change, but not at Sarasota City Hall. With Sarasota Bay rising 7 inches in 70 years, the city is doing everything it can to reinforce infrastructure and make sure it does everything it can to limit carbon put into the atmosphere. This week, a symposium is being held in Sarasota, Climate in Crisis. And joining us for more are Dr. Stuart Pim, an ecologist at Duke University, Dick Russell, author of The Horsemen of the Apocalypse, a story in a book about climate change, and Frank Alcock, a political science professor at New College. Thank you all for joining us. And Stuart, I'm going to start with you because when we talk about climate change here on the Suncoast and throughout Florida and how it will affect us all, sometimes people can't relate to what they can't experience and see, unlike Alton Road in Miami Beach, which floods every time there's a drizzle. Am I correct?
Yes, but you know, as somebody who lives in Florida part of the year, I have a home in Key Largo, I know about global warming because my insurance company tells me so. I get insurance premiums that are going up and up and up because the private sector understands that the risks with a warming climate are going to lead to a greater frequency of major storms like the one we had in the fall, and they want to get their money back. And so I think people in Florida know full well that the climate is changing, and if they don't, I wish I knew what their insurance company was.
Yeah, exactly. Dick, I want to hold this book up again because I don't know if we got a good shot of it before. Horsemen of the Apocalypse, the men who are destroying life on Earth and what it means for our children. And by that, I take it you're making reference to some of the big corporations out there that pollute a lot and don't necessarily take responsibility for what they're doing.
Exactly, and naming names, looking at the individuals who run those corporations. I finished the book before the 2016 election, so it was, I didn't expect it to be semi-prophetic because I profiled, for example, Rex Tillerson, who became Secretary of State. He was the CEO of ExxonMobil, and got into things like the fact that ExxonMobil, their own scientists knew, and we're talking about research that they had done 40 years ago, that showed we'd better do something and start doing it quickly about the impacts of climate change.
So, I mean, I want to get into this more later, but my impression was that Rex Tillerson, even though he was with ExxonMobil, was basically on the forefront of saying, take climate change seriously.
You know, he equivocated a lot. I mean, I wouldn't say he was on the forefront of that. More so than the Koch brothers, I would say.
He was opposed to leaving the Paris Climate Agreement, though. That's what was reported.
Yes, he was. Once he got in that position, he wanted us to stay in the Paris Climate Accord, which President Trump, of course, pulled out of.
Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, you recently went to a conference in California where the issue of what people believe and don't believe about climate change was really center stage there because it has become so incredibly politicized in our country.
Yeah, it was center stage to the paper that I wrote, the panel that I was on. It was a very, very big conference with lots of topics. But it's an issue that we as a country have moved in the wrong direction, I would add, a lot in the last decade, actually. The polarization that we're witnessing now on this issue just wasn't there 10, 15, 20 years ago. But we've seen broader polarization trends on a number of political issues in this country, and there's been a deliberate effort of folks on the right, again, to question the science and to hold a number of politicians that are running for Republican seats accountable if they support anything. So you've seen a shift, a cooling effect or a chilling effect on a number of moderate Republicans that otherwise would probably support some action on climate change.
Not a warming effect.
But yeah.
All right, stand by. We are just getting warmed up. We'll have much more on climate change on the Suncoast right after we check the first alert weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about climate change on the Suncoast in advance of a very important symposium taking place at the Sarasota Municipal Auditorium tomorrow starting at 4:30. We are being joined by Dr. Stuart Pim, an ecologist at Duke University, Dick Russell, the author of The Horsemen of the Apocalypse, a book about climate change, and Frank Alcock, a political science professor and environmental expert at New College. You know, Dr. Pim, we've done so many stories about climate change here on the Suncoast, but quite often when we have people from the other side, they'll say, look, you're so sure of your science out there, but there are other scientists who believe that the sea level rise and climate change are a naturally occurring phenomenon, and women don't have an impact on what's happening now.
You know, there are people out there who think the world is flat and that we didn't have moon landings, it was all made up on a Hollywood set. Yes, you can conjure up people who have views that are simply untenable. There is no scientific debate at all about the major features of climate change. The temperatures are warming, almost every year is hotter than the last.
But when we get into these conversations, and I've had them here in the seat that you're sitting on, others on the other side will say, well, you know what, there was a scandal a couple of years ago where scientists were accused of faking their data, which leaves the viewing public sometimes confused.
Well, look, people are out there who are deliberately trying to muddy the waters, trying to pretend the evidence is not there. But I think everybody understands, everybody knows that the years are getting warmer and warmer and warmer. Is that fabrication? Are the data from Mauna Loa that shows that carbon dioxide is going up and up and up and up, are they somehow fabricated? No.
Frank, where is public opinion on this right now? Because it seems to me that there are a lot of people who do believe in climate change and sea level rise. They're concerned about it, but they certainly don't vote on the issue.
As I said before, it is polarized. It remains a very important issue for Democrats. For independent and moderate voters, it's certainly something that they're concerned about and somewhat receptive to the science, but a bit hesitant with respect to how much this is going to cost me if you get too far into the weeds on policy issues. For conservative Republicans and also the remnants of the Tea Party, it's actually a cause célèbre in the other direction. As you were saying, a lot of these folks just live in a different universe in terms of the information that they have, and for them, it's actually a threat that government's going to sacrifice or take over or eliminate their liberties. And so, when it comes to elections, one of the things that we see in primaries often is all Democrats will talk about, what they're going to do on the issue of climate change. On Republican primaries, sometimes they actually make fun of it. When you get to general election, everybody gets quiet. Because it's not something that usually turns an election one way or the other.
Dick, in terms of big money out there in politics, there's money on both sides, but is there a real boatload of money that is being spent during the election campaigns to actually, push voters not to vote for candidates who are concerned about this issue?
Oh yeah, I think we've seen that with the Koch brothers from Wichita, who have an empire. It's the largest privately held oil and gas company in the world. They're $48 billion a piece, or the two brothers are worth, and they've been working very hard at climate denial and funding these nonprofit groups for a long, long time, pouring money into them that are basically set up to deny that climate change is a reality. So what that creates in the public is doubt, as we've been talking.
Is there a way you could quantify that?
Quantify it? What do you mean?
How effective the money that they spend in terms of basically blurring public opinion?
I don't know, if you can quantify it. I mean, but it is a reality, and the fact is that people then, doubts are raised in the public of whether this is accurate or, is there science really there? And the fact is that, all you got to do is look around at the weather. I mean, the intensity of hurricanes that Florida and every place else are seeing, tornadoes are increasing in 200-mile-an-hour winds, sea levels are rising astronomically.
Stuart, Sarasota did an interesting thing a while back. They put up a sign down near the water. How much is sea level rise expected to get at this place here? But the city itself has come under some criticism in terms of spending public money to do things like that. So to the general public who are watching this, who may agree or disagree, what would you point for them to look at in our own hometown in order the impact of sea level rise and climate change now?
Well, other than the insurance bill that I mentioned earlier, which, for me at least, is a big chunk of change. I think it's the fact that these things are probably going to happen in episodic and catastrophic ways. I mean, I have neighbors in Key Largo, in the Keys, who said, oh, you know, global change, there's no such thing as global warming. And they didn't protect their homes properly last fall. Some of them lost those homes because of the hurricane that came through. These things are going to come, and they're going to come and bite us, and it's going to be very unpleasant indeed.
Frank?
Just again to illustrate the change, if you go back to the 2008 election, one of the first commercials that ran in the general election was one where one of the candidates said that they were standing up to the Bush administration and calling them out for not taking climate change serious enough. And that was John McCain, the Republican candidate. Fast forward to 2012, while Romney got quiet, actually at one point he was pretty proud of his climate change action plan when he was the governor of Massachusetts. We move now to 2016, 17 candidates, 17 primary candidates, major primary candidates on the Republican side, and not a one thought that you should take climate change seriously.
Dick, when you look at our politics right now, people voted for Donald Trump for a reason, because he spoke to many middle-class voters, and that's why people voted for him. That's why he's president today. But you look at the EPA now, and all you hear coming out from the administration is in terms of rolling back EPA rules and regulations. They claim that you can protect the environment, but not burden companies at the same time here. Hey, this is what we voted for.
Well, it's just not true. And the fact is that the EPA was set up back in 1970 under a Republican president, President Nixon, in order to safeguard the environment and do, in terms of toxic waste. I mean, we had terrible air in those years, much worse than it is today. And now you've got a guy in there, Scott Pruitt, and at that agency, Rick Perry at Department of Energy, they basically want to destroy their own agencies. I mean, that's their purpose. That's why they came in. Donald Trump comes in as president saying that climate change is a hoax invented by the Chinese. I mean, to me, this is madness. I know that a lot of people don't quite see the reality of it, but if we're going to look at the future and what's going to happen to our kids and our grandkids, I mean, that's really what we got to be thinking about in terms of facts like Florida. Is in not too long a time, if temperature rises to 3 degrees centigrade, which most scientists are predicting it will, that means Miami and the bottom third of Florida is going to basically be underwater. And that's what people have got to start thinking about.
I spend a lot of time in China. And if the Chinese think it's a hoax, then they're doing some very funny things. They are the world leaders in solar panels, and they're world leaders in wind. They're putting a lot of their resources in getting out of fossil fuels. And that, to me, suggests that they understand very clearly what the direction is.
But, Frank, and we have less than a minute left here. We have a midterm election coming up here. Governor Scott is running for the U.S. Senate. He has banned state employees from even using the word climate change. But how likely do you think, you are the political scientist here, that that's really going to have any impact on that election?
It will be one of many issues, I think, that drive the blue wave. But will climate change come up in the talking points in that election between Nelson and Rick Scott? No. Neither one of them are going to talk about it.
Okay, we have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment. Stay with us. And our guest joining us right now for final thoughts. And Stuart, I'm going to start with you. I mean, you're involved in this symposium that's going to be taking place in Sarasota tomorrow. But on one hand, although what you're saying is really interesting, I would imagine that the people who go there are interested in this topic. What would you say, other than the insurance premium aspect, which plays to the hearts of everybody who has a wallet, for folks who will write into this show afterwards and say that, it's all fake and made up stuff?
I think those people should think, when they go to see their physician, do I take that person's view because he or she is an expert? Or do I go to a quack who's going to sell me snake oil? And if they choose the latter, they're probably going to die. Much the same is true with all science. We're living in a political environment where science has become just another opinion. That's a disastrous thing for us to be doing as Americans.
Dick, you write in your book about the big money interests out there and the companies and the people who are responsible, who don't want the most to be done about climate change. Who is winning the money battle here in terms of being able to spend the money to influence public opinion?
Well, I think right now the big corporations are winning the battle. But, you know, the fact is that Florida, the Sunshine State, has tremendous potential economically for solar power, and it's just not happening. The utilities, my understanding is, control basically the electrical grid and are not supporting solar, and because natural gas and coal make a lot of money. But I think that's certainly something that can be much stronger emphasized.
Frank, you know, I walk around our neighborhood. I have neighbors who have solar panels up on their homes right now, and I remember talking to Yogi Goswami, who's one of the world's foremost experts on solar power at USF, who noted to me that in the 1970s and 80s, solar power, Florida was the headquarters for the solar industry until Ronald Reagan became president. The solar panels came down from the White House, and the tax breaks went away.
It's surprising that we call ourselves the Sunshine State. We have not been very friendly in terms of our solar policy, but it is an area that, for everything that I said in terms of, again, pessimism on the political side, I do think this is an issue where there are a number of things that we can do policy-wise, that if we can just make some ground up, I think economically they do make a lot of sense, and so we could see some traction going forward.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight. FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. We want to thank our guest, Dr. Stuart Pym, an ecologist at Duke University, Dick Russell, the author of The Horsemen of the Apocalypse, a book about climate change, and Frank Alcock, a political science professor and environmental expert at New College.